Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is your host Weeb Union, and in this one we have several Russian advances in the eastern section of the front line. The Russians have advanced further in the northeastern flank of Velika Novosilica, west of Kurakhove, in the western flank of Pokrovsk, and to the south of the city, and along the intersection where the Russians have now physically cut the road between Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk with geolocated footage to back up that claim. The Russians have also managed to advance within Toretsk, gaining 100% full control of the city. The Russians have also managed to capture the industrial zone in the central parts of Chasiv Yar. With these advances, the Russians have made significant progress along the main areas of fighting, which is the city of Pokrovsk, Velika Novosilka, Toretsk and Chasiv Yar. Starting out in the direction of Velika Novosilka, the Russians continue advancing towards the town from the northern direction, where they are closing in on the town itself and advancing towards the fortified positions of the Ukrainians northwest of Velika Novosilka from their weak point from the eastern direction. There are two lines of defense. The Russians are attacking the southern line of defense. The northern line of defense is within close proximity to Novy Kumar, which the Russians have full control of and will likely launch operations from. The objective of the Russians would be to reach Velika Novosilka from the north to completely cut off any potential supply to the town, while at the same time advancing towards Novo Ocheretuvate to fight over the settlement as well as the fortified positions to the north, while at the same time fighting over the fortified positions to the south. This will allow the Russians to gain control over the fortified area, which is also located at a high ground overlooking the town. Gaining control over Velika Novosilka will allow the Russians to have an additional supply hub for further offensive operations in the area, both in the direction of the remaining parts of the Donetsk region in the southwestern outskirts, but also to launch further offensive operations towards the Zaporizhia region, where they can actually flank from the eastern direction from the weak point of the defensive lines, gaining access to the fortified positions, then moving alongside them along the border area and gaining control over the Zaporizhia line of defense, allowed Russians to advance all the way towards Huliaipole and down to the Zaporizhia section of the front line. Velika Novosilka therefore acts not just as a supply hub, but the final fortified outpost in the western outskirts of the Donetsk region for the Ukrainians, and capturing it will allow the Russians to have an open road to the fortified positions and therefore be able to start the battle over the Zaporizhia region as well, slowly but surely advancing into the northern and western parts of Ukraine. The Russians have also managed to advance west of Kurakhove in the direction of Dashne, where they have captured a forest line ahead of the settlement and advanced along the Dacha area in between the two towns. The Russians are slowly advancing towards Dashne to gain control over another settlement here in between Vovcha River and Sukhyali River, following the capture of Yantarne. The objective of the Russians is to gain control over both river lines in the northern and southern banks of them, to then advance towards Anderivka and Konstantinopel west of it, and advance towards the Dnipropetrovsk region along the Vovcha River line, exactly as they are doing along the Solona River line here in the southwest of Pokrovsk. To the southwest of Pokrovsk, the Russians have now cut off the roads southwest of the city towards the Zaporizhia region, where they've reached the outskirts of it and they have presence within it, where they're fighting over the forest lines around the railways and the settlements of Kotline and Udashne, hit along the highway and the railway, as well as the fortified positions in the area. The Russians are here looking to completely physically cut these roads and railways as they try to gain additional roads into Pokrovsk from a weaker point, which is the western direction compared to the southern direction, while at the same time allowing them to advance into the Dnipropetrovsk region. And yet again, we talk about how there are multiple areas where the Russians can enter the Dnipro region from both the Kurakhove direction, the Pokrovsk direction, and the Velika Novosilka direction. The Ukrainians are using this time ahead of the Russian entry to build some final minute fortifications along the border areas of the Dnipro region and deeper within it to prepare for the Russian arrival. That means the quicker the Russians reach the Dnipro region, the better it is for them militarily speaking, considering the longer they take, the more defenses the Ukrainians will have built. Naturally, they will not be as well protected as the ones built since 2014 and 2015, like around Pokrovsk and Kurakhove. However, it is naturally better than having nothing, therefore it will still help the Ukrainians with the defense of the region. The Russians have also advanced along Pishane, gaining full control over the settlement, as we see with this geolocated footage, and have also managed to capture a fortified position north of it and entered Svirove, the western outskirts of the settlement, as Russians continue fighting over the highway and moved closer towards Pokrovsk itself. The Russians are moving along two roads towards Pokrovsk itself right now. That is the area east of Shevchenko towards the railways, alongside them up to Pokrovsk in the southeastern direction, and along the western direction through Svirove, and then up to the residential area southwest of the city. With this, we see that the Russians are advancing through these two directions. It would likely increase to three as the Russians move along the western parts, as well as the eastern parts towards Mirnorod, or from the highway to the east, again through Mirnorod. That means that the Russians will likely fight over Mirnorod just as they are fighting over Pokrovsk from two directions. In the direction of the intersection in between Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka, the Russians have not just managed to physically cut off the road, they've also managed to capture some fortified positions on the road there and a farm area. The Russians are here moving with armored vehicles, dropping off infantry along the highway, and the fortified positions occupying them and gaining control of them. This allows them to physically cut the highway between Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk and start offensive operations alongside the highway. The Russians would here look to advance north along the highway towards the flank of Konstantinivka, expand their foothold across the highway, where they can start occupying some of the settlements on the northern bank of it, and at the same time advance towards Mirnorod from the eastern direction, using it as a supply hub for further offensive operations here in the area in between the two, separating them further, advancing along the main road here to the north and further towards the flank of Pokrovsk for an encirclement on a wider angle. The Russians can look to gain a full encirclement of not just Pokrovsk, but also Mirnorod and the general area with the fortified positions completely covered, and this will create a large encirclement of Ukrainian forces, forcing either a large withdrawal or gaining a large encirclement. However, again, the larger the encirclement, the more risk is being carried, as Russians would have to dive deeper and not have as strong flanks as they currently have with the slow and secure advances. Therefore, similar to the advances of the Russians northwest of Avdiivka following the capture of the city, they'll likely advance on a wide front, and therefore we can expect a large wedge for the Russian forces, with they managed to gain control over the area between Toretsk and the intersection, as well as advance towards the settlements on the northern road. They'll be able to have a very strong flank in the northern direction, and with a push towards Mirnorod, the outskirts of it, towards the fortified position, they'll be having a wide flank on the western direction as well, and be able to gain control over some of these roads to the northern direction, and further limit the supplies of the Ukrainian forces defending the city and present within Pokrovsk. The Russians have managed to gain 100% full control over Toretsk with the capture of the remaining residential area in the northern parts of the city. Krimsk remains under Ukrainian control, but that is a settlement part of, yet not part of Toretsk. The city of Toretsk itself has been completely captured, but Krimsk itself remains under Ukrainian control. There is some of the fortified positions on the northwestern outskirts of the city, which also remain under control of the Ukrainians, and the fortified positions southwest of Toretsk, but the industrial area, residential area, and the entire area of the city of Toretsk itself is now under Russian control, with this final advance in the northern parts of the city. We see that the Russians have made several advances across the eastern section of the front line. They're also advancing along Chasiv Yar, gaining control over the industrial area, as they have been managing to flank the positions of the Ukrainians along the apartment complex area, industrial area. This allowed them to gain entry into it, and with new assaults, the Russians regained control over industrial area, the fire plant. And with this, the Russians are now moving into the apartment complex area from the northern and eastern directions to squeeze out the Ukrainian forces into the southern district of Chasiv Yar. Russians are now slowly gaining full control over Chasiv Yar. It is unlikely that the Ukrainians will be able to regain control over the industrial area, and it's likely that it will soon lose the apartment complex area, as the Russians have now secured the northern flank of the city. With this, the Russians will likely gain full control of it within the coming weeks, and this will lead to further offensive operations by the Russians, both with the capture of Toretsk and Chasiv Yar to gain control over the eastern and southern flanks of Konstantinivka. With a push from the highway to the west, they'll be able to flank it from 3 different sides and start a siege of the city, similar to that of Pokrovsk in the western direction. The Russians are now initiating their final operations within the Donetsk region to gain control over Pokrovsk, Toretsk, and Chasiv Yar. This will lead to the siege of the final defensive line of the Ukrainians in the region. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.